Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a song by Bob McQuillan, who's a local piano player, quite famous around the neighborhood. This is another song of his called A to Z Waltz. Thank you very much. We're called Grove Street. We happen to, I live on Grove Street, it's almost on Grove Street. We play on Grove Street all the time, so we're called Grove Street. We do have a CD that's for sale out and back when you get to the reception part of things, but that's not why you're here. Now we're going to switch to a song called Peg O' Ramsey. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that any man may see, and Bonnie was her face with a fair frecked eye. Neat is her body made, and she hath good skill. Round are her bonny arms that work well at the mill. With a hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel-ill. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that works well at the mill. With a hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel-ill. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that works well at the mill. Some will call her Peggy and some call her Jean. Some will call her Midsummer, but they are all mistaken. Peggy is a bonny lass, works well at the mill, for she will be quite occupied while others they lie still. With a hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel-ill. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that works well at the mill. With a hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel-ill. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that works well at the mill. Up goes the hopper and in goes the corn. The wheel goes round about and the stones begin to turn. The meal falls in the meal trough, quickly does it fill. For Peggy is a bonny lass, works well at the mill. With a hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel-ill. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that works well at the mill. With a hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel, hey-tra-lodel-ill. Bonnie Peggy Ramsey that works well at the mill. Same old man living at the mill, and the mill turns around with the right good will. A hand in the hopper and the other in the sack. Ladies step forward and the gents fall back. I said the owl with his head all white. It's a lonesome day and a lonesome night. I thought I heard a pretty girl say, court all night and sleep all day. I said the raven as she flew, if I had a young man I'd have two. If one got saucy and wanted to go, I'd have a new string for him a bow. Never give her time to say your name. My old man's in Kalamazoo and he don't wear no yes I do. First to the left and then to the right. This old mill grinds day and night. Same old man living at the mill, and the mill turns around with the right good will. A hand in the hopper, the other in the sack. Ladies step forward and the gents fall back. Ladies step forward and the gents fall back. Ladies step forward and the gents fall back. Fall back. Where are the Planksties? So, okay, I'm having a moment here. It's in here. There. So. Um, That was two songs by Turlough O'Carolan, who was a blind itinerant harpist from the 1700s, lived in Ireland. He wrote hundreds of songs. This is another called Mr. O'Connor. We like Turlough O'Carolan quite a lot. Intro. Thank you very much. Piece we love is called Julian of Norwich. We invite you to sing along. The words are pretty straightforward. 5 minutes. Loud are the bells of Norwich, and the people come and go. Here by the Tower of Julian, I tell them what I know. Ring out, bells of Norwich, and let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know. Ring for the yellow daffodil, the flower in the snow. Ring for the yellow daffodil, tell them what I know. Ring out bells of Norwich and let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know. All shall be well, I'm telling you, let the winter come and go. All shall be well again, I know. Okay, I think we're going to stop now. Thank you very much. Here goes the lecture.
Thank you all.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Kim Snyder. I'm going to be your moderator today. I'm pleased to welcome you to the Monadnock Summer Lyceum with today's guest speaker, Jack E. Davis. Before we get started, I'd like to thank today's musicians, Grove Street, and give them another little round of applause. Thank you to Grove Street for providing the music many of you enjoyed while waiting for the live broadcast to begin. Also, thank you to Monadnock Community Hospital for generously sponsoring today's event, and to the Harris Center for the beautiful flowers. For many years, the Monadnock Lyceum has brought outstanding world-class speakers to the Monadnock region to serve as catalysts to inform, engage, and inspire an active citizenry on local, national, and global issues. Today's talk is being recorded and will soon be available as a podcast and as a video on our website, monadnocklyceum.org. Programs are rebroadcast on WSMN 1590 AM the next day, Monday, at 7 a.m., and on WUML 91.5 FM the following Wednesday at 11 a.m. Following the presentation, our speaker will answer questions from the audience. Those present in the church may submit questions via the yellow card in the rack in front of you. You can take a second and locate that now. An usher will come around to collect them, so just hold those aloft if you have a question written on them. For those watching virtually, please submit your questions using the live chat section on YouTube. The Monadnock Summer Lyceum is supported entirely through donations and contributions from our audience and community members. We deeply appreciate your donations, which may be placed in the glass bowls in the church and in the parish hall. Those listening at home may make contributions on our website or by mail. Thank you sincerely for your generous support. We also encourage you today to give us feedback on today's program using the green card in your pew, and to join our mailing list and/or email list. Please drop your green card in one of the glass bowls. For those online, please use our website to provide feedback or suggestions, or to join the mailing list. After the program, we invite you to attend an informal reception in the parish hall, which is through the door to my right. Our speaker today is Jack Davis, and I'd like to begin his introduction with a question for all of you. By show of hands, how many of you have seen a bald eagle in the wild? So, reading Jack's most recent book, The Bald Eagle, The Improbable Journey of America's Bird, is akin to watching an eagle on a bright afternoon. surveying the subject from a high perch with a keen eye for detail, and occasionally circling around a topic for a closer look or diving right into a river of information and extracting a tantalizing tidbit. Like the bald eagle itself, Jack is a seasonal migrant, dividing his time between his work as a history professor at the University of Florida and as a resident of Harrisville, New Hampshire, just down the road from us today. His work has used a historical lens to reveal insights into the natural world around us, teaching us time and again how everything from politics to geologic history to human emotions influence the environment around us. In addition to the bald eagle, Jack is also the author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning The Gulf, The Making of an American Sea, and the Florida Book Award's gold medal recipient, and Everglades Providence, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and the American Environmental Century. Jack's writing and work brims with a sense of justice and dignity in the struggles of the oppressed, be they animal or human. His Twitter feed celebrates independent bookstores and calls for increasing compassion and vigilance for the natural world, the LGBT community, and racial justice. Now, please join me in welcoming Jack Davis.
Thank you, Kim, for that wonderful introduction, truly, and the lovely music. Wasn't that a nice warm-up? And I'm not sure if I want to follow that, and thank all of you for coming out. We all realize that we have a very small window of sunshine today, and you've given it up to come here. I don't know why. I think I would be out there if I were you, but thank you for coming. And I had to say, this venue, I've spoken in hundreds of venues over the years, indoors and outdoors, in basements, in a penthouse, in a bar where they kept me well charged with tequila, and a wonderful old historic courtroom where they would not let me speak from the judge's bench. So to be here on this high perch is particularly special, but also in this historic building and knowing all of those who've come before me in this lyceum. So I'm truly honored to be here speaking with you today. And I usually start out by asking how many people have seen a bald eagle before? But that question's been asked, and I have to say, over the years, I see more and more hands coming up. At least a larger proportion of the audience have been raising their hands, so it was really nice to see so many hands come up. We're going to come back to that. I'd like to start by reading an excerpt from the book. It takes about 3 minutes. I'm an academic, but I don't write like an academic. I write my books for an intellectually curious audience, such as yourself. And so I want to give you a flavor of the book, but also I think this is the little story I'm going to tell here is a good way to get into what I'm going to be talking about today. Aloft in the Eyrie, by the way, you may know that an eyrie is another name for a nest of a raptor or a so-called bird of prey. It's typically the word used in Great Britain, but Americans also use it as well. So when you hear me say eyrie, I'm not talking about something that would frighten you. I'm talking about a bald eagle's nest. Aloft in the Eyrie, safe at home, were two young bald eagles, 5 or more pounds each, physically the size of a rugby ball. They were nearly ready to experience the brilliance of flight. Their eyes were dark, their feathers too. The spiky ones on their heads drew back as if a stiff wind were perpetually blowing in their faces. Their legs, feet, and beaks were leather-colored, their talons black and long. They were alone together in the nest and safe. At 5 to 6 weeks, eaglets are typically left unattended while their parents are off fishing or hunting, giving the young room to romp and exercise. By then, they are too big to be preyed upon by an owl or a hawk, and they have their talons, 4 on each foot, 8 lethal pirate hooks. Eaglets growing into juveniles are to be avoided, not accosted. Yet there are always violations of what's expected, such as when an odd, unfamiliar creature, no feathers, no fur, no scales, appeared at the edge of the two eagles' security. The figure rose slowly and deliberately beside the eyrie, not unlike a cautious prairie dog peeping out of its burrow, except this strange creature showed no fear. Its intense blue eyes fixed on the young birds. They backed away to the far side of the nest, beaks open, narrow tongues protruding, hissing. The smaller of the two balanced clumsily at the edge. The odd figure, about to become an unquestionable threat, stretched forward and reached for the teetering eaglet. It jumped. The falling youth instinctively opened its wings and, slack on the air, glided safely into a clump of saw palmettos. The blue eyes then turned on the other eaglet and reached out again. The eaglet sensed a grip around one of its wings and, fighting back, drew blood, but could not free itself. It felt something around one of its feet, small and metallic, clamping, but not restraining. The intruder let go, and the frightened bird scrambled back and away, watching as the blue eyes dropped back below the nest. On the ground, the intruder crashed through stiff green fronds of saw palmettos, where the second eaglet was hiding. If it had eluded its antagonist, the young bird could starve or succumb to other dangers, since parents sometimes leave stranded eaglets on the ground. The most immediate danger pushed closer. The grounded bird panted, fronds open in sunlight, and the blue eyes fell on the eaglet. It scrambled off, flapping its wings, using them as weapons. The pursuer persisted. The bird was seized, its wings and legs arrested. As with its sibling, something metallic went around one of its feet, but this eaglet was not set free. The soft cover fell over its head of spiky feathers, and all went dark. For a long period, the eaglet was in a blinded, free-floating space, tugged about at times, swaying at others. Finally, light appeared as the cover was lifted off. The eaglet was back in the nest. Its dark eyes found its sibling, and it clambered over and away from the intruder, watching the strange being slip down and out of sight. Although the two eaglets would not see the blue eyes again, every new brood in the same nest south of Sarasota, Florida, would have a similar brief but terrifying encounter with the same visitor. Now, I'm not going to tell you who those blue eyes belong to, at least not yet. But we'll come back to those blue eyes in a bit. I wanted to tell you why I decided to write this book on the bald eagle. I think virtually everybody in here raised their hand when they were asked whether they'd seen a bald eagle. If Kim had asked that question, or if I had asked that question 10, 15 years ago, there would have been many fewer hands. 20 years ago, maybe one or two. We didn't see them so often 15, 20 years ago. I'm a baby boomer. Baby boomers didn't grow up with bald eagles. They were a rare sighting when we were coming of age. But now we see them a lot, and we're excited about seeing them. And it's one of those, you see a bald eagle flying overhead, it's one of those elbow the guy next to you in the ribs excitement. For some reason, we're just ever excited to see a bald eagle. And so that's one reason why I wrote the book, because we're starting to see them more often than we did 10, 15, 20 years ago. And so I thought readers might like to know a little bit about this bird that they're seeing more often, the bird that they're so excited to see. And I also wrote the book because I'm an environmental writer, and unfortunately, environmental writers often have this habit of falling to this rabbit hole of tragedy and doom and gloom. While there's much grim and tragic in the history of the bald eagle and its relationship with the American people, there's also restoration and redemption. It's an uplifting conservation success story that I wanted to tell. And it really begins with the bald eagle itself. As I said earlier, I wrote this book in part because I wanted readers to learn a little bit about both the species and its relationship with the American people. And the species, the bald eagle species, the bald eagle is only one of two eagles that live in the United States. The other, it shares the United States with the golden eagle. The bald eagle is slightly larger. An adult female bald eagle, female raptors are typically larger and heavier than the male raptors. A female bald eagle from the north can weigh up to 14, 15 pounds. Down south, the bald eagles are a bit smaller, and a female might reach 10 or 12 pounds. They typically lay 2 eggs once a season, and they mate for life, by the way, and the female typically lays 2 eggs. There may be one season, or maybe 3, but it's typically 2. The eggs hatch after about 36 days of incubation under both parents, by the way, and they will fledge around 16 weeks of age. But they'll stay around the nest for another 4 or 5 weeks before they leave their natal territory. And as I said, the male and female mate for life. How many of you have had the good fortune of seeing a pair of bald eagles engage in a mating ritual? Were you about to raise your hand? No. It's a spectacular sight. You have. Yes, it's a spectacular sight, isn't it? And it's a death-defying sight in some ways. They engage in an elaborate aerial ritual, and they do all sorts of acrobatics to impress one another, especially the male for the female. And at one point, when they both apparently have agreed that they will become a couple, they will lock talons in midair and go into a free-falling somersault. And they'll come down and down and down, and just before they hit the ground or the water, they separate and take off again. And they are a pair for life from that point on. So it's a really spectacular sight. They are migrating birds, which is something that ornithologists did not always know and even argued against. Which I touch on in the book. And they are obviously a large bird and very handsome. You cannot tell a female from a male except with size and other scientific evidence. But as far as the eye, you need to have a male next to the female to tell which one is the male or the female. Now, bald eagles have a long relationship before Americans came along, before Europeans came along, have a long relationship with native peoples dating back thousands of years. For many native groups, the bald eagle has been and remains so a spirit bird, a relative, as many native people say, a bird that is a messenger bird between lost ancestors and the people on earth, or between the people and the higher spirit. And they've long played an important role in the rituals, the religious rituals and ceremonies of many native groups, their feathers, their body parts. And so native peoples for, again, thousands of years have been hunting bald eagles, but not in excess, taking one or two out of the wild for their feathers or for their talons or for their tail or their beak to use in their ceremonies. When Americans came along, or when Europeans came along, the bald eagle population was across North America was estimated to be about 500,000. And so it was very visible. The first European settlers on the East Coast saw bald eagles everywhere. They are fishing raptors. They will eat birds. They will eat land animals, reptiles, and mammals, but they prefer fish. And so bald eagles nest typically within a couple of hundred yards of a body of water. And so when Congress was meeting in Philadelphia, Continental Congress, there were bald eagles up and down all over the Delaware River and the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. On July 4th, 1776, the day that Congress approved the Declaration of Independence, it also appointed a committee to create a Great Seal of this new country, the Great Seal of the United States. And a Great Seal, or a seal of a nation's seal, is more or less its credentials card, establishing its identity, but also its legitimacy. And so for that committee, Congress appointed Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Ben Franklin. Stellar cast, right? You would think, here are these are the main architects of American independence and freedom. It'll be a no-brainer for them to come up with the Great Seal of the United States. Now, what did Ben Franklin want on the Great Seal of the United States? Don't answer if you've read the book. Only answer if you otherwise know. The wild turkey. How many of you guys have heard that about Ben Franklin wanting the wild turkey for the Great Seal of the United States and as the national bird? And I don't know how many people I've had come up when I was writing this book and giving talks on the Gulf, would come up and they learn I was writing this book, come up and say, you know, Ben Franklin wanted the turkey for the Great Seal of the United States. And I would always respond, you know, that's wrong. That's a myth. Now, Ben Franklin did compare the quote-unquote morality of the bald eagle with the wild turkey, maintaining that the wild turkey was an honest and hardworking bird, while the bald eagle was a craven thief because it stole fish from osprey, which is true. They are fantastic thieves, and they do steal a lot from the osprey. The osprey is a better fisher, has a higher success rate of catching fish than the bald eagle. So why not steal? But from Ben Franklin's interpretation, it was therefore this cowardly, dishonest bird. And he was disappointed, he claims. You never knew when he was telling the truth, by the way. But he did say that he was disappointed that the bald eagle was chosen as the nation's representative. Now, he did not say the national bird. What is the national bird? We don't have a national bird. We have a national mammal. We have which is the bison. We have a national tree, which is the oak. We have a national flower, which is the rose. But Congress has never designated a national bird. So tomorrow, in its wisdom, Congress could designate as our national bird the sidewalk pigeon. And then somebody would argue that it's a Democratic conspiracy if they did that. Or vice versa. Or the Republicans are out to destroy the country. But we do not have a national bird, and the bald eagle is not a national bird. But it has been on the Great Seal of the United States since 1782. It took Congress 6 years, finally, to come up with a proper seal. What did Ben Franklin want for the Great Seal of the United States when he was on the Stellar Committee, which, by the way, failed miserably? Does anybody know? If you read the book, don't answer. If you want to know, you'll have to read the book. And we will be selling them, and I will be signing them in the back afterward. But it will blow your mind when you learn what Franklin wanted for the Great Seal of the United States, because you would not have expected it of him. But finally, 6 years later, 1782, Charles Thomson, who was the Secretary of Congress, said, hey, listen, guys, we're going to go sign a peace treaty soon. We need a frickin' Great Seal. Nobody could. 3 committees failed. 14 consultants failed. Everybody failed. And Thomson started sketching a bald eagle. He'd seen them all over Philadelphia. It made total sense. His sketch wasn't that great. It looks more like a chicken or a turkey with chicken legs than a bald eagle. But it's been refined, thankfully, and it's a pretty great image now. And Congress immediately accepted it. They said, yes, yeah, it's one of those moments right there in front of us the whole time. And to me, it is the ideal image to go on the Great Seal of the United States, because the bald eagle embodies those values that we associate with our country: courage, strength, and freedom, of course. But it's a charismatic bird. It's a handsome bird. It has that "don't tread on me" stare. And so I don't, but also the bald eagle is truly an all-American. The bald eagle lives nowhere else in the world but in North America, which I think is pretty great. And the image, the seal that Congress finally adopted, was an instant hit. Americans fell in love with the image. Now, the eagle, just generic eagle images, non-ornithological eagle images have been around for a long time. They've been on nation-state seals dating back to the ancient Greeks and Romans, to their time period. But these are all non-generic eagles, non-ornithological eagles. The bald eagle is the first identifiable eagle species on a national seal. Americans fell in love with it. They started putting the image of the bald eagle on everything, on their business logos, their organizational logos, of course, military insignia, and in uniforms. I mean, we see it everywhere today. You can't, back in motorcycle jackets. How many roads and ponds and lakes are named after named eagle or bald eagle? Anybody in here ever owned an AMC Eagle? You actually admit that. You acknowledge nobody, I asked that question 1,000 times. Nobody really has the gumption to respond yes. That was a car that did not live up to its name. Am I right? Yeah, maybe, yeah. So we have the AMC Eagle, we have the Goodyear Eagle tires. The name is everywhere, American, and it always have. We have the Eagle Scout, instead of the Wolf Scout, which is the British equivalent, which preceded our Eagle Scout. It's everywhere. Americans love the image, but they hated the species because the bald eagle is a predator bird. And they lumped it in with other predators, such as wolves and coyotes and mountain lions and bears. And a bald eagle scene was a bald eagle to be shot. And Americans shot them a lot. Shooting a bald eagle is regarded as a civic duty. Even if you didn't have chickens in your backyard, your neighbor had chickens. This is back in the 19th century and early 20th century. Your neighbor had chickens. And so, you shoot a bald eagle, you tell your neighbor, they're going to give you a chicken. And I did a search on newspapers.com, which is a fantastic database of daily and weekly newspapers, thousands of newspapers across the country, dating a database that dates newspapers that date back to the colonial period. I did a search from 1850 to 1920, a date search from 1850 to 1920, using 3 words in quotation marks. So I had to be an exact match. Bald eagle shot. I got over 160,000 hits. And reports in the newspaper, there were reports on bald eagle. Obviously, these reports in the newspapers on bald eagle, they were not condemnatory. Rarely did I come across a report of the shooting of a bald eagle that condemned the action of the person who either shot or clubbed the bald eagle. Instead, they would report on the killing of a bald eagle as if John Smith had gone down to the lake and caught a 15-pound bass. They'd always give the length of the wingspan and the weight of the eagle, talk about whether, always mention it was handsome, brilliant looking, whatever, and talk about how it was killed. Again, it was a civic duty. And this went on throughout the 19th century into the 20th century. All the while, Americans loved the image. All the while, the bald eagle image is going to war with the Americans to fight for freedom. And finally, in 1917, when America entered the First World War, then known as the Great War, taking the image of the bird of freedom with it, a bird of freedom that was being denied its own freedom back in the United States. In that same year, the territory of Alaska, the legislature in the territory of Alaska passed a law authorizing a bounty on bald eagles because they were regarded as unnecessary competition for salmon fishers and those working in the fox fur industry. And from 1917 to that bounty remained in effect from 1917 to 1952. The territory of Alaska paid bounties on over 260,000 sets of talons. If you'd handed in a set of talons, you'd get 50 cents. There were some people that went into the full-time eagle bounty hunting business in Alaska. In the United States, bald eagles by then had all but disappeared from the eastern seaboard states where they had been so prevalent, and many of the Midwestern states. They were so scarce in the east that many people thought bald eagles were Rocky Mountain birds. And so by this time, there were many people who were concerned that the bald eagle might go the way of the passenger pigeon, the last of which died in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1914, or the Carolina parakeet, the last of which died in the Cincinnati Zoo in 1918, which suggests that you should never go live in the Cincinnati Zoo. But they were worried that that the living species behind this important, internationally known, impressive symbol would go extinct and thus undermine the integrity of that symbol. And so people started pushing National Audubon, get Alaska to rescind its bounty, do something to protect the remaining bald eagles in the lower 48 states. National Audubon wouldn't do it. It sided with the prevailing belief that it was a predator that needed to be controlled. And so this woman from New York by the name of Rosalie Edge, who was a member of National Audubon, was frustrated with National Audubon, founded her own organization, the Emergency Conservation the Emergency Conservation Committee, as a response to a national Audubon, to expose the duplicity in the organization, but also to lead a campaign to protect not just bald eagles, but all raptors, which were being shot for the same reason that bald eagles were being shot. She and others campaigned for federal protection for the bald eagle. Finally, after 3 attempts in Congress, Congress passed in 1940 the Bald Eagle Protection Act, which made it a federal offense, punishable by a fine and potential imprisonment if you harmed a bald eagle. The bald eagle became the first bird species to get its own protective legislation, federal legislation. That was, again, in 1940. Sadly, what happened 5 years later, in August 1945? DDT was released to the open market. And just as the bald eagle image was an instant hit, so was DDT in 1945. Used not just in agriculture, but everywhere. Mosquito control in suburban neighborhoods and cities. It was made available for household use. You could go down to the grocery store and buy DDT in a number of different forms to take home to use. We ended up spreading this, as I write in the book, this coverlet of DDT across the lower 48 states. And it had a devastating impact. People, as early as 1945, recognized the dangers of DDT and wrote about it, but the chemical industry was so powerful that DDT continued to be used, and it was the pesticide of choice. And so as a consequence, we all are familiar with the impact DDT had on bird life. It also had a tremendous impact on fish life, the food of bald eagles. So DDT was getting into fish, getting into the food chain of the bald eagle, and getting into their bodies. And they were having the same problems as other birds, laying addled eggs or eggs with weak egg shells, devastating their population. In 1963, National Audubon, that finally came around to liking the bald eagle, conducted a national census of bald eagle nests, and the count was under 500 in the lower 48 states. Under 500 bald eagle nests in 1963, the year after Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. Under 500. And so Americans became alarmed, not just about the bald eagle's environment, but their own environment. They became alarmed about fouling their own nests. 1970s, as many of you are familiar, was the environmental century in the United States. Congress passed a bipartisan, Congress passed a whole stream of unprecedented environmental laws. 1972 was a watershed year for the bald eagle. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife strengthened the penalty for harming the bald eagle under the Bald Eagle. By then it was the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. Also in 1972, Congress passed the Clean Water Act, which ultimately went a long way to cleaning up the nation's waters. Only 1/3 of the nation's waters in 1972 were safe for swimming and fishing. Today, it's the exact reverse. 1/3 are unsafe for swimming and fishing. So bays and bayous and lakes came back to teeming life. Aquatic life came back. Fish life came back. Bird life came back. So the food source is being restored for the bald eagle. Also in 1972, the EPA, William Ruckelshaus, the head of the EPA, took the very brave move and banned the sale of DDT in the United States. There was a lot of pressure on him to not do that, but he did so, supported by Richard Nixon. And then 4 years later, in 1976, U.S. Fishing, with all these chess pieces in place, U.S. Fish and Wildlife launched eagle restoration programs, beginning in New York, in Georgia, and eventually establishing a program at Quabbin Reservoir in Massachusetts to restore the bald eagle population in New England. Maine was the only New England state in the 1970s that had any nesting bald eagles. New York had no nesting bald eagles. Pennsylvania had no nesting bald eagles. Most of the southern states had no nesting bald eagles. Indiana had no nesting bald eagles. But these restoration programs were a huge success. They continued through the 70s and the 80s. Even into the 90s, Washington, D.C. had a bald eagle restoration program that was led by a urban youth group. The Quabbin Bald Eagle program was responsible for restoring the bald eagle population in New England. Today, when you see, those of you who raise your hands, you said you've seen a bald eagle, more than likely the bald eagle you've seen is a descendant of that Quabbin program. What bald eagles do, what they were doing in this program very quickly is Massachusetts wildlife folks were bringing young bald eagles 4 or 5 weeks of age from healthier states such as Michigan or Minnesota and Canada, bringing them to, relocating them to Quabbin, raising them in these big giant, I call them lion cages, outdoors on stilts that are exposed to the elements, feeding them from behind blinds so they wouldn't imprint on humans, but they would imprint on their territory. And where the territory that the young imprint on becomes their natal territory. And bald eagles return to their natal territory when they reach breeding age. And within the 4th year of this program, one of the first Quabbin graduates had returned to find a mate and build a nest. It is just, and again, it's been a huge success, those programs across the United States. And we owe ourselves a pat on the back for that, for taking care of the environment that is not only the bald eagle, but that is our environment, doing right by nature. But we also have to give not only ourselves credit for the bald eagle's comeback, but the bald eagle themselves. They have what I refer to as the ideal family values. As I said, they mate for life. They maintain a fidelity to the same nest for life. They will return to that nest every season, and they'll refurbish it. They'll add on to it. If it's been lost in a storm, they'll build a new one in the vicinity. And it's all about location, location, location. And they want to be near water. They want to be where they can see water. And they will, in fact, those nests, as I said, they add on to them every year. Bald eagles can live well into their 20s in the wild. Some of these nests will be 20, 30 years old with multiple generations living in them. One nest I write about, when the old hickory that it was in collapsed, it was measured to be 8 feet across, 12 feet deep, and to weigh 2 tons. So who can blame the hickory for saying enough is enough? And so they get bigger and bigger every year. And they raise their young with such devotion and care. They feed them so well that when their young leave the natal territory, finally after about 20 weeks, they typically weigh a pound more than their parents. And they feed them so well that the next season, those young will come back because they remember how well mom and dad fed them. And mom and dad will chase them off because they've got a new brood they've got to take care of. And it's very common for that to happen. And so the young will leave first at the end of breeding season, and then mom and dad will leave. Mom goes in one direction, dad goes in another direction. which may be the secret to mating for life. And they'll come back. They'll come back. They always come back, and they often arrive within a day or if not hours of one another at the same nest. And they immediately get to work refurbishing it and preparing for laying eggs. And so today, the bald eagle population in the lower 48 is estimated to be over 300,000. Continent-wide, the bald eagle population, that's Alaska, Canada, the lower 48, and northern Mexico. Continent-wide, the bald eagle population is estimated to be 500,000, the same that it was estimated at the time the first Europeans came. Now that's a success story. I think we're doing questions now.
Yes, so thank you, Jack, for sharing that with us. Okay, yeah, so we have some time for questions from the audience. For those watching virtually, as a reminder, you can submit your questions using the live chat section on YouTube. For those in the chapel, remember the yellow cards in your pew. If you have a question for Jack, feel free to go ahead and write it on that, hold it up for an usher to pick up, and they will pass it to me, and I will read it to Jack.
While you're doing that, I neglected to come back to the blue eyes, to tell you who those blue eyes belong to. Those belong to a retired banker from Winnipeg who at age 59 moved down to Tampa, Florida with his family. His name was Charles Broley. He was a banker. He was not an ornithologist. This is in the 1930s. And what does he do in retirement? He doesn't play golf. He doesn't play shuffleball, which was shuffleboard. No, wait a minute. Yeah, shuffleboard? Yeah, shuffleboard, which was very popular in the Tampa Bay area in those days. He started climbing longleaf pine trees, 60, 70, 80 feet tall, and banding eaglets. And he did that for 20 years until age 79. Never fell out of a tree, amazingly. Because he was the only one doing it at the time, and from his banded birds, we learned, he confirmed, or his birds confirmed, that indeed bald eagles do migrate, that they do move across state lines. Florida birds would many of them migrate as far as Canada. Saskatchewan birds migrate down. Northern bald eagles migrate south after breeding season. Southern bald eagles migrate north. Saskatchewan bald eagles migrate down to Colorado. Colorado bald eagles migrate up to Saskatchewan, passing each other in the sky. I don't know, and they're undoubtedly fishing in the same fishing holes as their counterparts. But Broley also was the first person to make a link between DDT and the declining bald eagle population, which he was witnessing firsthand. In fact, Rachel Carson writes about him in Silent Spring.
All right, while we wait for our ushers to collect our questions, I'll go ahead and ask the first question. So Jack, I wonder if you might tell us about your favorite encounter with a bald eagle that you've had.
So one of my favorite encounters with, when I was writing the book, there are a lot of bald eagles near where I live in Gainesville, Florida, and a photographer and I, a graduate student in communications, and I would go out in the mornings to this one particular place to film bald eagles, and we would see bald eagles. We'd see them catching fish. We'd also see them stealing fish from other birds and other eagles. And at one point, we saw a bald eagle flying or aerial borne with a fish in his talons, being attacked by another bald eagle. And the two were fighting, had this aerial battle over this fish that went between the two 5 times. And you have to wonder what this fish was thinking. But the most special personal encounter is with Sarge, who's the bald eagle in my author's picture on my arm. who's a flightless bald eagle, is now used for education purposes. And she's been to 3 talks of mine and stolen the show, of course.
Okay, a member of our audience asks, since the bald eagle only exists in North America, where do they migrate to?
Well, they migrate across around North America, as I said. The southern bald eagles, meaning those who breed in the nest in the south, they'll fly north. There's no set pattern. Their migration patterns are very individualistic in nature. Some bald eagles from Florida, for instance, will only migrate to Georgia. But some will go up to Massachusetts. Some will come here to New Hampshire. There are Alaskan bald eagles, some that migrate out to the Aleutian Islands and spend their summer there between breeding season time out there. But some Alaskan bald eagles will fly down to California, some to Washington. And nobody knows why. There are a few that go to New Mexico. So their migration is very random, but they do not migrate outside of the United States, outside of the North America, unless they get lost, and that's typically juveniles who do that. I read about a couple who ended up in Ireland, as a matter of fact, and one was flown back to the United States in a plane. And so probably angry the whole time, not realizing that, it was a pretty special bird.
Okay, another member of our audience asks, is there any initiative to formally name the bald eagle as our national bird?
Thank you for asking that. I'm part of that initiative. There is an initiative that the National Eagle Center in Wabasha, Minnesota. Anybody here from Minnesota or Wisconsin? Right there on the bar. Do you know that you got? We are in August. We will be doing an official launch of this initiative. We have some congressional folks who we've been talking to, Native peoples who we've been talking to, and so we will. Yes, so there is an initiative. And we can't imagine it would not be successful. I mean, there would be somebody in Washington who will vote against the bald eagle, but I can't imagine that it won't be that'll be a difficult task to get it named.
We have a question from one of our online viewers. What is the survival rate for baby eagles?
Eaglet's survival rate, I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's very high. And they are only preyed upon when they're young, and again by other raptors. In particular, eggs can be preyed upon by rascally raccoons and others, of course. But mom and dad are very good at protecting both the eggs and their eaglets. You have to put yourself in the position of, say, an owl. If an owl sees this white head rising above this giant nest, it's not going to go anywhere near that nest. And it's just not worth the effort. And there's typically that white head sticking above that nest until they reach 4 or 5 weeks of age, and when typically they're not preyed upon. But there are other things. There are things that the mites are a problem. Storms are a problem. Humans, much less today than once are a problem. But the success rate is quite good.
All right, another audience member question. How long do eagles tend to live? And when one member of the pair bond dies, what happens?
So if if one of the pair dies, the other one will immediately go out looking for a new mate. It's important to keep the species alive to them. And it was not unusual for, if a mate is lost in the middle of breeding season, for a new one to come along and help along with the brooding or with the raising of the young. Sometimes multiple. There have been cases in which there have been, I write about an eagle pairing which involves one female and two males. And it's an interesting story that I don't want to share here. You have to read the book. They will live in the wild typically into their 20s. In captivity, they've known there are eagles that have lived to be 40 years of age. So in captivity, it's not unusual for them to live in their 30s. The greatest threat, because this may be a question coming up, the greatest threat to bald eagles today is lead poisoning from hunting. Now, hunters are among our first and our most devoted conservationists. They love nature, they love the wildlife. Many those that engage in big game hunting, which in this country means deer and elk, typically use lead shot. And they gut their kill in the woods thinking they're doing the good thing. They're repurposing part of their kill. It'll go back, it's remain in the food chain. Unfortunately, a shard of lead the size of a grain of rice can kill a bald eagle. And bald eagles are not just thieves, they are scavengers. They're fantastic scavengers. They'll push vultures out of the way. And unfortunately, they will scavenge on those gut piles. So the best thing is either not gut it or convert from lead to some other metal, such as copper, right? Right? Copper's one of the options, yeah.
All right, we have another question from an online viewer. How many nesting pairs are there in New Hampshire?
I don't know. Does anybody know what that number is? I'm sorry, I don't know that. I should have done my homework before I came here. The population is healthy, as I said, near here at Lake Nubinessa. Maybe I did not say that. Is a nesting pair, and the male is the oldest known bald eagle in New Hampshire, who must be reaching around age 30 now, I believe, and who again is a descendant of the Quabbin bald eagle, the Quabbin Restoration Program.
I have another question that's kind of a good follow-up to that one. Where are good places to see bald eagles around this area, and are they still at the Quabbin Reservoir?
Yes, Quabbin is probably the closest and best place to see bald eagles in action. If you're in the Monadnock area, if you go out to Nubinusset, kayak or canoe out there, you have a good chance of seeing bald eagles fishing. A friend of mine would, a couple of years ago, every morning when he went fishing at, what was the pond? Say that again? No, not Jackson Pond. It's, I can't remember the name of the pond. He'd go out fishing, and every morning he would see a bald eagle roosting on a tree, eyeballing him. Bald eagles are like brown pelicans. They will accept handouts. They can be moochers. And so they will pay attention to what people are doing fishing. But Quabbin, as far as nearby, Conowingo Dam down in northern Maryland, between breeding season and the wintertime, in the fall, in late fall is a really good time to see bald eagles. Reelfoot Lake in Tennessee, where I live in Florida, Paynes Prairie. Best thing to do wherever you are, just Google for best sites places to see bald eagles. Yes? 80 pairs in New Hampshire. Thank you, Kathy Bollerud. According to Audubon. So that's good for this size state.
Yes. All right, let's go to this one next. Are eagles territorial at a given lake?
They are absolutely territorial, and they demand a lot of space. And that's one reason why they'll chase their young away that have come back after a year, because they don't want the competition, they don't want any interference. They'll keep other eagles out, but they'll also keep other crows. But at the same time, other birds they'll keep to try to keep away to protect their nest. At the same time, it's not unusual to see crows and even smaller birds mobbing bald eagles because bald eagles will steal baby birds out of nests. So other birds are quite territorial and don't like it when bald eagles are around.
All right, we have time for one more question. Just a reminder to everybody in the sanctuary that we will have a chance to ask Jack some of these questions later during our reception. So I'll close out with this one. What organization or organizations do you most respect for their work supporting raptors and birds in general?
Oh, virtually every state has a raptor rehabilitation center, and they are wonderful places. If you're looking for an organization of that sort to support, I highly recommend. In Quechee, Vermont, they have a wonderful raptor center. The Harris Center, you cannot, the Harris Center is just invaluable what it does in terms of bird study, and many state Audubon groups do census counts of bald eagle nests, and so they are doing a great service as well. So I recommend supporting your local or state Audubons, but also the raptor centers.
All right, I'm gonna
somebody said, excuse me. Yeah. Okay, what's the pond again? Powder Mill Pond in Hancock. Yeah, Powder Mill Pond. So great, no, thank you. I'm glad you did. Okay, well, thank you. You've been wonderful, and thanks again for coming out.
Okay. Thank you again, Jack, for sharing your time and expertise with us. We hope you have enjoyed today's live broadcast of the Monadnock Summer Lyceum. Thank you for your support of our 2023 season. You may join us next week to hear James Sturm, whose talk is entitled Applied Cartooning, Civic Engagement, Public Health, and Funny Animals. Now please join us for an informal reception in the Parish Hall. Again, that's through the door to my right. There you will have the opportunity to engage in further conversation with our speaker and enjoy some cold drinks. Thank you very much, everyone.